Welcome back to another episode of Biff Bam Pow, a comic book podcast. This is a very special episode and is the longest episode that I've done to date. This is a comic that holds a very special place in my heart, and that is, of course, All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. And of course, I had to ask good friend of the show, Owen Likes Comics, to join me in celebrating this masterpiece, as it is his favorite comic book of all time. As always, thank you so much to my patrons, Matt Parrott, Fink, Malcolm Russell Nelson, Joe Palumbo, and Chris Hacker. If you like what you hear on the show, consider joining the Patreon linked down in the show notes below. It is only one tier at $2 a month, and you get every single benefit, which includes new comic reviews, monthly bonus episodes, early access to main feed episodes, monthly AMAs, and more. If you're looking for a place to buy your trade paperbacks, graphic novels, omnibuses, deluxe editions, and any other collected edition for a great price, go to organicpricebooks.com and at checkout use code biffbampow for $2 off your order, or you could use code biffbampowsit for 5% off 4 items or more. As always, all my socials are linked down in the show notes below, and that is all from me. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. All right, Owen, welcome back to the show. Your second time on. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on. I feel like I've been really excited to have this conversation with you. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we've been speaking a lot recently. I had you on my show very recently to talk about Batman the Cult. That was a brilliant conversation. So as soon as you said that you wanted to chat again, never mind about my favourite comic book of all time, it was an absolute no-brainer. So more than happy to be here. And I'm looking forward to breaking down all things about this weird and wonderful graphic novel.
Yeah, this is a big one for me too. This is one of my favorite comics of all time. I'm timing this kind of with the movie. I'm doing my best Marvel editorial impression with my movie synergy here. But you know, the movie's coming out. I'm very excited for it, as I'm sure you are. And I thought, what a perfect time to cover the greatest Superman story of all time, and also what I consider the definitive superhero story. It's All-Star Superman, of course.
I think I'm on record somewhere on the internet saying that I think this is not only the greatest Superman story ever written, but perhaps the greatest comic book ever written. And I think I've even said this is one of the greatest pieces of literature ever published, which that part could be hyperbole, but I am also more than willing to stand by it, because this is, we'll get into it when we talk about it, but this is my favourite comic book ever. This is the book that made Superman my favourite character. It's the book that made Grant Morrison my favourite writer. And it is like a story that I hold very near and dear to my heart. So you're not going to get any backlash from me on those sentiments.
Of course, of course. So before we get into all things Superman, I have my 2 icebreaker questions. I'm only going to ask the one because I'm sure you have talked about how you got into comics, but what are your Letterboxd top 4? Now, I asked this previously, so it might be the same, but as we all know, these things change all the time. So is it the same? Is it different?
I don't know if I've updated them. But I also can't remember what I said they were last time. I didn't go back and listen. So no, I think they are different to what they were last time.
Okay,
so we've got... This one was definitely on there last time. I think 2 might be still the same from the last time we spoke about this. Good Will Hunting by Gus Van Sant, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Robin Williams. One of my favourite kind of coming-of-age movies. The Royal Tenenbaums by Wes Anderson. I've always been in a bit of a, I've always been between 3 about what my favourite Wes Anderson film is. It's always between this, The Darjeeling Limited, and Rushmore. But rewatching The Royal Tenenbaums after Gene Hackman's passing was like, yeah, this is the one. So that's in there. Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi. It's a classic.
Just
best
incredible.
Best superhero movie ever made.
Yep.
And then the 4th one, is definitely a new addition into the top 4, but it's just because I've watched it a couple of times this year and it's become a bit of a comfort movie. 1988, Hayao Miyazaki, My Neighbor Totoro.
Oh, I love, every time I do this letterbox, a lot of the times I see people tell me a Hayao Miyazaki film or any Ghibli film, and Totoro is never mentioned. And I love that that's on your top 4. I love My Neighbor Totoro.
Yeah, and it's not me trying to do like the hipster's choice. Obviously, like I love Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle, and I really, and The Wind River, and I really loved The Boy and the Heron. I thought that was just
masterpiece. Yeah.
But yeah, Totoro, I guess, is a little bit of an underrated. I always said that my favorite Miyazaki film was Kiki's Delivery Service. I think I watched that at a really good time, and I think it was either, I feel bad for not knowing exactly, but I think Patrick Willems or Scott from NerdSync did a video on it and talks about it from the perspective of being a creator struggling with burnout. And it was like, it all kind of hit me at a very good time where I was like, I can really relate to this film. So I've always loved that one. And then, Totoro was one I hadn't seen until maybe a year or two ago. And it was just randomly playing in my local cinema one evening. I don't even think it was like an anniversary or anything. It was just playing. And I was like, I've never seen this film. I'm going to go and watch it, and just instantly just fell in love. And it's just become a bit of like a comfort movie now, where it's just like, if I need to like just switch my brain off and just feel good, that is my thing I'll go to.
I love Totoro. I think it was my first Ghibli movie. I love it. I don't think it's as like deep and thought-provoking as something like Princess Mononoke or Spirited Away, but it's just such a charming, fun movie. I love it.
It's got a cat bus in it. Look, it gets 5 stars just for the cat bus.
And I mean, Totoro is the mascot for Ghibli, so...
And he is just like the cutest boy.
He is. Whenever he smiles, that big smile is... it's electric.
It is. So that's my current top 4. I'm glad that you've asked me now and not at the end of this month, because excitement levels for a certain movie may cause me to be slightly hyperbolic. And be
it's
like,
just
this
going
is
to be...
the greatest, which I last did when The Batman came out. And I was like, this is the greatest movie ever made.
This is the greatest movie ever made. It's and like...
I still believe it's the greatest Batman movie ever made. And it's
I agree.
5, it's probably in my top 5 of superhero movies in general. But I was ready to decry it the greatest film ever made.
I mean, it's very good. It's definitely, I love it. It's definitely top 5 superhero movies ever, or comic book movies in general. So post July 11th, your Letterboxd top 4 will be James Gunn's Superman 4 times.
That's the hope. Anything less will be a huge disappointment.
Yeah. I have faith. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited. I'm seeing it twice on opening day.
That's commitment.
I'm going once at midday, so I'm doing like 12:30, and then so that'll finish at like 3:45, I think, and then I'm seeing it at 5 with a friend.
Okay.
And I'm really hoping my friend's not listening to this, because I haven't told him I'm already going to see it in the day, because I didn't want to wait till 5 p.m.
You're going to have to put on your best acting performance that second time.
My hope was that, like, it'll be dark in the cinema. He won't see the fact that I'm not like as reactive when big twists and stuff happen. But yeah, I haven't got the decency to say, I'm literally leaving the cinema and then coming and meeting you and going back to the cinema. And I just really hope that none of the staff in the cinema are like, hey, you're back. Because that would be really awkward.
Yeah. All right, let's get into All-Star Superman. So before we get into the behind the scenes and the book itself, I want to know, what was your first encounter with this comic and why does it mean so much to you?
You know what? That is a really great question. And this is something I've been thinking about. So kind of peel behind the curtain a little bit. At the time of recording this, I'm just finishing up a big video project I've been doing on another one of Grant Morrison's Superman books, Action Comics from the New 52, the kind of 18-issue run they did with Rags Morales, which is kind of like I'm resisting the urge to go off on a tangent about that one, though. I'm sure it will come up because I think those two books, that and this, are very much in conversation with each other. So I've been really kind of, I've been in Grant space. I've been thinking a lot about Morrison's themes and their ideas and their backstory, and specifically their Superman. So All Star obviously has been on my mind a lot. And I was thinking, like, when was the first time I read this book? And I'm honestly not sure. I always equate the thing that made me realize that I could kind of talk about and write about comics professionally and kind of be a historian of superheroes to reading Supergods, which is Grant's kind of non-fiction novel, which is like one part autobiography and one part kind of like PhD thesis on the history of comics. It's an amazing piece of literature if you haven't read it. I think it's like the definitive text about superheroes. And I read that when I was in my first year of university as an undergraduate. The university library just happened to have a copy of it, and I read it, and it was like a eureka light bulb moment, changed my life. And I still credit that with, like, there wouldn't be Owen Likes Comics if it wasn't for kind of discovering Supergods. But I was already a comic book reader by that point, and I'd already read a lot of Grant Morrison's books. I was still at that point where it was like, I like these, but I don't fully understand what's happening in a lot of them, which is still how I feel about certain books. Just side-eyeing Final Crisis as we speak.
Every time.
I definitely already read All-Star Superman by the time I encountered Supergods. But that then made me want to go back and revisit that series, and it was kind of like the post Supergods reread of All Star that was kind of like the mind blown, the meme from The Hangover where he sees all the numbers and stuff in front of him, like Galifianakis' character. That was basically me. It was that second read through, like post Supergods. Once I'd unlocked Morrison, if you will, in my head, I'd fully understood the thought process and their philosophy on superheroes, and I'd really kind of thought I'd found a connection with this writer that I enjoyed, but was struggling to get to grips with some of the kind of wacky and nonsensical stuff that they do in their books. So it was that second read through of All Star where it was like, oh no, this is the greatest comic book I've ever read, and this is now my favorite comic, and it has been pretty much ever since. And that was probably a decade ago now. So, but I definitely had read it before, but I think it was like around 10 years ago I reread it, and it properly had the effect that it has. But this is something we'll talk about. A lot of Morrison's books work best when you read them a couple of times. I don't think any of their books are designed where you get everything on the first go. It's why I've been having so much fun with Action Comics, because I remember reading that issue to issue back through like 2011 to 2014 when it was coming out. And now reading it a decade later in the trades is such a different experience. And they really do cram so much detail and lore and mythos into their works that it rewards kind of constantly rereading and challenging yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, this is one of the greatest comics ever written or just ever made. It's incredible. It's the definitive Superman story. It's the definitive superhero story. I honestly can't even remember the first time I've read this. I'm like you, I'm sure Grant Morrison's comics are my most reread comics, period. Like, I know my 3 most reread comics are this, New X-Men, and Animal Man. I've read All-Star Superman maybe 13 times, I want to say. I've read this comic so many times, and I always get something new out of it every single time I read it. This book is just brilliant. And it's not my favorite Morrison. That always goes to Animal Man, but I think that this is his magnum opus. I think excuse me.
It is. It's kind of like, this is a phrase I used recently when I did a big Green Lantern video a couple of months ago, and I covered Morrison and Liam Sharp's Green Lantern run in that. And I used a phrase to describe that series that I also think applies to All Star, in that it's the most Grant Morrison comic imaginable, and All Star really is like it is. If you want the perfect encapsulation of what a Grant Morrison comic is like, there is no like more pure Morrisonian, whatever you want to call it, book than All Star. It is just full Morrison off the deep end, doing what they do best, with no like editorial or filters or restraint. It's All Star and it's all Grant.
Yeah, and we were talking a bit off mic as well. The other master, just at the top of their game in this book, is Frank Quitely. And Frank Quitely is my favorite comic book artist, period. And on this reread, I read it from the newest printing of the Absolute Edition that I got last year. And just seeing these pages in these giant oversized format was just breathtaking. And, I noticed little things that I didn't notice before in the art, like little facial expressions here and there. Like we'll get into some of the details in the issues in a bit, but in the Lex Luthor Prison Break issue, which is issue 5, some of Clark's facial expressions are just incredible, and I've never noticed that before. And, obviously everybody has seen the sketch image of the difference between the posture of Clark and Superman, and I think that Frank Quitely is the artist to do that the most effectively. Like, Clark and Superman look like totally different people in this comic. Like, it's insanity how talented Frank Quitely is so talented. And man, like, this book, you have two masters at the top of their game, and you just get perfection.
It is like, for me, like Morrison and Quitely together is like a Mount Rushmore comics creative team. It's up there 100%. With like Lee Kirby, like Bendis and Bagley, like all of like my favorite creative duos. I would very much put, like, if I had to think of like who Morrison's like definitive collaborator is, and they've worked with so many amazing artists over the careers. But like it's Quitely, like that is the perfect like companion to the writing, and this is like Frank Quitely's drawn so many awesome comics and they're such an amazing artist, but this is like next level. I know Quitely's art can be a little bit polarizing because everyone looks like they've just got out of a swimming pool. They're all a bit kind of wrinkly and shriveled up. Everyone kind of looks like a raisin, but I adore Quitely's
I love
art.
it.
I think there's something so human and gentle about it and sincere. It borders on kind of cartoon with still having a very realistic element to it. I love the way he quietly draws Superman. Just even in the small details, like I love the way the creases on his suit, like I said, the subtle expressions and the way he can very quietly and very kind of subtly change a connotation of an expression with just like a small change in the art. And it's funny because like with how high concept and silly and bombastic this book is, and with all of like the crazy plots that Morrison throws out, this is a challenging job for any artist to pull off, to do all of these crazy stories where Superman is like fighting a Sphinx, and then he's going, and then Doomsday's there, and then he's on a bizarro planet and he's getting shot to Earth with a giant trebuchet, and then for all of the like silliness and wacky Silver Age stuff, the book is also like incredibly heartfelt and emotional, and quietly manages to pull off all of those moments as well, like the issues with Lois in I think issues 3 and 4, and then like his final speech to Lois and with Lex in the last issue is like only Quietly could pull that off, and like the diversity and the range that he shows in this book is unreal. And also shout out to Jamie Grant as well. I don't think he gets
the colors are excellent.
We talk about the things that make this book so well, because I think Grant's colors add so much to this series.
Yeah, of course. All right, so I do want to get into a bit of the backstory, but before I do that, I just want to give a little preamble. We're not going to get into each issue. We're not going to go like deep diving into each issue. Go read the comic if you haven't already. I am going to link in the show notes below friend of the show and just incredible person, Eric Azana, did a 12-part podcast epic, if you, I guess that's the only thing I can call it, on All-Star Superman, where he did a deep dive into every single issue. It's a 12-issue series. He did one episode on each issue, and you were on one of those episodes.
Yes, I think I did issue 6. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I think I did the Jonathan Kent issue, which is like, we'll get to my second favorite issue in the entire.
Yes.
And like maybe in my top 5 favorite single issues ever. But yeah, Eric's like, there's no shortage of good coverage, whether it's written, video, or audio on All Star. Like, I've made videos on it. Like friends of mine, like Matt Draper's done a good video on it, and other kind of YouTubers. But yeah, like Eric's podcast series is the definitive.
It's a definitive
analysis and coverage of that book. I was more than thrilled and pleased to be on it, but also just to listen to every episode. And for a comic I've probably read 50 times, and I've made videos on it. I've talked about it in other videos. I wrote a 5,000 word chapter for a book that's coming out soon, all about this comic. Wow. I thought I knew All Star inside and out better than almost anyone. I thought I was kind of as close to an expert on this book as you'll get. And then listening to Eric's series of podcasts, every issue I was learning something new or a new perspective on something I hadn't quite picked up on. So it's like, yeah, absolutely. Do go and check that out.
It's incredible. So yeah, listeners, if you want a true deep dive into each and every issue, I'm going to link that series down in the show notes below. You should already be listening to Geeksplained if you listen to this show. They're one of the best. But yeah, so before we actually talk about All-Star Superman, we need to talk about something that is very much in conversation with it, and that is the making of this comic, which is fascinating because I have a lot of notes here that I'm just going to read off. There was a pitch in the late 90s where Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Mark Miller, and Tom Peyer came together and basically wrote a pitch for a revamping of Superman for the 21st century. And that was at the time called Superman 2000, later called Superman Now. So basically in 1999, Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Mark Miller, and Tom Peyer, they crafted this pitch to essentially retool Superman for the 21st century. In the late 90s, there were 5 Superman titles. There was like Adventures of Superman, Man of Steel, the Superman title, and then Action Comics. And I think there was one more.
Like the tail end of like the Triangle era of Superman books.
Yeah. And it was post Death and Return of Superman. And Superman comics they sold really well during that period. Like Death of Superman at the time was the highest selling comic ever, I'm pretty sure. It quickly.
At the time, it was one of the best selling. I think
it was one of them,
X-Men
yeah.
#1, the Jim Lee cover is the highest, but it was definitely up there.
It was up there, but at post Return of Superman, it was getting at like, I wouldn't say sales were dipping, but it was leveling out. It wasn't selling as well as it should have.
And obviously at this period, like DC had tried to do, because the thing with the Death of Superman is, and to anyone listening to this, you probably already know this, is it was a kind of huge marketing stunt, which paid off massively with kind of mainstream audiences and with speculators. It became this huge commercial kind of experiment with doing these kind of stunts, which now are really commonplace in comics. Characters get killed off. Marvel can't go a month without releasing a slate of new #1s. Like, this is now just kind of common practice in the industry. But in 1993, this was a really new endeavor. And so the Death of Superman, that storyline sold huge. Like the issue where Superman dies was a big seller. The Funeral for a Friend issues was huge. And then everything building up to the return of Superman the following year was massive. And yeah, like you said, they kind of, the sales didn't like plummet, but they kind of like went back to kind of normal levels. And DC tried to do a couple of other things, like, right before Morrison and co do their pitch is you have the Electric Blue Superman era, where they're like, well, let's change Superman's design again. Let's kind of change his power set. Let's do this, which is a period of Superman comics that I have a bit of a soft spot for, but will also be the first to admit that they're not very good. And obviously, at the same time of this, Morrison is writing Justice League.
JLA,
Morrison starts writing JLA in, I've not got it in front of me, but I think
97. I want to say like late 97.
So they and Howard Porter start doing JLA, and like 4 or 5 issues into that, in the
He's
Superman
blue
titles, he's now blue, and Morrison has to incorporate Electric Blue Superman into their run. And I would argue, does some really cool stuff with it.
They do incredible stuff. There's that scene in I think it's Rock of Ages where Superman's holding the moon together with his electricity powers, and it's one of the best Superman moments ever.
Like that Superman Blue, even like into like the Superman Red stuff we splits into, was never done better than when it was written by Morrison and when it was drawn by Howard Porter. I kind of have a soft spot for that era. But yeah, so kind of at this time, DC was looking for ways to kind of revitalize Superman, reinvent him a little bit, do something different. And I said Morrison was writing Justice League, Mark Waid, Tom Payer, Mark Miller were all kind of big up-and-coming writers at DC. And so they drafted a 21-page proposal called Superman 2000. And then I'll tag back into you and stop hijacking your history.
No, that I appreciate that. But at the same time as well, Mark Waid and Alex Ross do Kingdom Come, and Kingdom Come sells like gangbusters and is super popular, and that is that's notable because it's an Elseworld story and it's a different take on the character that new readers can kind of just pop in and out of. One of the biggest problems with the Superman books at the time were that they were impenetrable. There were 5 Superman titles, and you would think that, oh, there's a Superman title for everybody, but that's not the case. They were all interconnected. So let's say part 1 of a story was in Adventures of Superman, part 2 was in Superman, part 3 was in Action Comics, and so on and so forth. So you're buying 5 Superman books, 1, that's expensive, and 2, new readers can't really hop in. So
am I also writing saying, like I said, I don't have this in front of me, I should have prepared this, but was Miller also doing the Superman Adventures comics at this time, or was that after?
Yes, and I do have that noted here.
He was writing the comic tie-ins for Superman the Animated Series, which is, as much as it pains me to compliment Mark Miller, they are
not a great guy.
Solid Superman stories. So it made sense to bring these creators in to basically say, well, how would you fix Superman effectively? Yeah,
so now this is really, I found this really interesting, and it's something I kind of knew about, but anyways, at San Diego Comic-Con 1998, Morrison and Mark Waid are there, and they're doing like, Superman promotions and stuff. They're with the editor of JLA, Dan Raspler, and they see a little group of cosplayers, and there's a very famous picture. A lot of the notes that I have on Superman now are from an AIPT article back in 2020 that I will leave in the show notes as well, that includes that image of Mark Waid and Grant Morrison with a group of Superman cosplayers. It's a very famous picture, but the cosplayer that is cosplaying Superman was so like life and in character that Morrison decided to do a little Q&A with this cosplayer. And the one thing that they kind of hyperfixated on was Superman's posture. And I have the quote here. So Morrison states, "This is how Superman would sit. He wouldn't puff out his chest or posture heroically. He would be totally chilled. If nothing can hurt you, you can't afford to be cool. A man like Superman would never have to tense against the cold, never have to flinch in the face of a blow. He would be completely laid back, untense. With this image of Superman relaxing on a cloud out for us in my head, I rushed back to my hotel and filled dozens of pages of my notebook with notes and drawings." Obviously, we know what that image would become. It's maybe the most famous image of Superman ever, but that just shows like how like All-Star Superman was in Grant's head for so long.
Yeah, that's one of my like favorite stories of comics ever. Like that's
it's incredible.
Talking about the time they bumped into John Constantine in a bar in Liverpool. Like, yeah, I fully believe that if Grant Morrison and Alan Moore say that they've met these characters in real life, who am I to doubt them?
Yeah, and what's so funny is that this isn't the first time that this has happened for Grant, and it also will get to the second time that happens,
Yes.
because it is very related to All-Star Superman. But yeah, so after that whole encounter, they, like you said earlier, Mark Miller was writing the Superman Adventure comic, which was the tie-in to the cartoon, and Tom Peyer had been, a big-time writer and editor at DC at the time. So Morrison and Waid brought those two in, and they hammered out a 21-page pitch that would essentially retool every aspect of the Superman mythos. And they kind of justified this pitch as being akin to the tradition of like a 15-year revamp of the character. Like you had that from, Golden Age to Silver Age, and then like 70s to John Byrne, and then this was the next one.
That quote in particular is something that's been on my mind a lot when I've been researching Action Comics. Is this idea of that Morrison says that like superheroes as like a myth and as an idea have like these 15-year life cycles, and at the end of those 15 years is when you have to reinvent them. And so for Superman, like you said, that's the 15 years takes you from the golden age 1930s champion of the oppressed Superman to the kind of the American way, kind of uber patriot, almost like father-like Superman. He's like holding an eagle on his arm and he's draped in the American flag, which then takes you into like the cosmic, Mort Weisinger, Technicolor Superman of like the late 50s and into the 60s, which then takes you into like the 70s and 80s and into the John Byrne era. And then I'm guessing that Morrison and Waid kind of see themselves as the next phase of that cycle of like what Byrne did for Superman in the mid-80s, we're now going to do for the turn of the millennium, which is a really interesting concept, especially when you then consider that a lot of we'll get to it, but a lot of the DNA of the series ended up going into other things that Morrison and Waid and Miller all wrote. And then effectively 15 years later, roughly, is when Morrison does Action Comics, which is another kind of canonical reboot of Superman. So those cycles. Yeah. And then if I think the math's correct, 15 years after that is when Grant did Superman and the Authority.
Yeah.
Their career is almost
insane.
It's fascinating to me. But carry on.
Okay, so this pitch it's one of my favorite like historical what ifs in comics, because it is a pitch that I like a lot of, and then some of the stuff I'm like, this could either be a good or a bad thing depending on where they take it. But overall, I think if this happened, I think it would be pretty awesome. So this was essentially the big idea. The pitch, just the bullet notes, because there's a lot of intricate details, but we don't have time to go through the entire 21-page pitch.
I should add as well as when I was writing my Action Comics video, I found there is a website that has the entire 21-page document with loads of notes and sketches. I will dig that out and I'll send it to you so you can include that in the show notes, because it's just a fascinating thing to go through. I spent like a whole afternoon reading through it, and while I maybe used like 2 sentences from it in the video, the entire thing was just an absolute treasure trove.
Yeah, actually the Absolute Edition of All-Star Superman has a lot of Grant's sketches from the Superman Now pitch document. They have a bunch of has a bunch of the sketches from there.
I think a few of them as well are shown off in the Talking with Gods documentary.
Yes.
Because I think a few of the clips and images I put in the video of the sketches are from that documentary. So if you want to learn more, they are good resources to use. Yeah,
that documentary is incredible. I'll also link that in the show notes. But yeah, so the pitch, the first thing that's listed is Superman gets a new costume, different S logo. It's kind of attached to the cape. It's a lot bigger. Kind of looks like the James Gunn Superman movie logo a bit,
we'll get
which is interesting.
It's funny how a lot of these ideas for Superman are very similar to like that early New 52 era.
Very similar.
Which I think is really fun, because the way I've been reading Morrison's Action Comics is it's almost like calling it a middle finger to the New 52 seems extreme, but it's very much kind of at odds with what the rest of DC was doing with Superman at that time.
Yeah, and I think they should have gone the Morrison route, but personally...
But the fact that the kind of main Superman status quo of that era that Morrison is kind of like rubbing up against has a lot of roots in a pitch that Morrison helped create 20
which
years
is
earlier.
Interesting.
Is very fun, I'd say.
Yeah. And the other big thing, which this is probably the only thing I dislike about this, no trunks. I love the trunks. I think you either have to have a belt or trunks because you have to break up the color or else he just looks naked and it looks weird. I
would go even further. They have tried different designs with the belt. Like you've got the Rebirth suit and the New 52
which
suit.
I do like.
It's fine. I would still just rather have the trunks. I'm yet to see
you need the trunks.
A trunksless design that wouldn't look better by adding trunks. Now, movie stuff is a different conversation. I like Cavill's suit in Man of Steel, and for the tone and for the feel of that movie, trunks just wouldn't look right.
Yeah.
I think that was a good decision to not have the trunks because for the design of that suit and for that world and of what Krypton is,
it would look a bit weird. Yeah.
It might be a bit tonally jarring, but the James Gunn movie, for example, absolute no-brainer to put the trunks back on there.
Yeah, 100%.
And as far as comics go, I'm a purist. Superman should always have the trunks. Batman, I can take or leave.
I can take or leave. Batman has so many costumes that it doesn't, it works with or without.
And also kind of Batman's not dressed in primary colours. It's greys and blacks and maybe the occasional bit of blue. It all kind of blends into itself and he's always kind of in shadows. It's a lot less noticeable than with Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, from a colour theory perspective,
you have to break it up.
The rebirth suit is nice, but when it's got the little tiny red belt and then the blue boots, does make it look like he's wearing a onesie.
Yeah, I like the rebirth suit, the one that Jorge Jimenez draws right after the merging of the two versions of Superman, where it's the red belt with the yellow buckle and then the red boots are back. I think that if you're gonna do trunkless, you gotta do that suit.
Yeah, that's probably the best of the non-trunk versions of the costume I've seen. But I still wouldn't say it's good enough to justify changing a kind of set.
Yeah.
Look, that Superman design has existed as it is, pretty much unchanged for 70 years. It doesn't need...
It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's perfect. But yeah, so that's the costume change. I think the costume design is actually pretty cool. Again, it is in that image of the costume sketch that Grant did is in the AIPT article that I'll link below.
It's quite I always think it's quite a regal looking costume.
It is, yeah. It's very, interesting.
I don't know what the word is I want to use to describe it, but there is something kind of royal and regal about it, with the big kind of centerpiece logo attached to the cape and with the collar and with without the trunks. I don't know. I just always think it's a cool design. As an Elseworld story,
I think it's cool. Yeah,
a cool thing to see, but I don't know how I would have felt if that was kind of Superman's canonical costume going forward.
Agreed. Yeah. So next big thing, some big villain revamps. Of course, if you're gonna do a big retooling of Superman's world, you gotta revamp some of these villains. There's a bunch of little changes to a lot of his rogues gallery, but the biggest one obviously is gonna be Lex Luthor. And what I found really interesting is that their pitch was to have basically a merging of the classic Golden and Silver Age Lex with the John Byrne, Donald Trump corrupt CEO character type, which is essentially exactly what Jeff Johns did in Secret Origin and in the New 52 was and that's what I think of now as Lex, is the CEO who is also a genius mad scientist. You gotta have both.
I've always kind of got the vibe that Morrison really likes the kind of classic mad scientist Silver Age Lex.
Yeah.
Because that's very much how he's portrayed in All-Star. And there's a lot of that in his New 52 where, he is he's a military contractor and he has his war suit and stuff. But he's always kind of scheming and making devices and trying to summon portals and stuff. Morrison seems to have a real affinity for that more classic take on Lex. And I think that with how prevalent and widespread Byrne's reimagining was, and then obviously the portrayal in the DCAU, which to me is still the definitive take on Lex Luthor. I think it made sense to kind of meld the two. And like you said, people like Mark Waid in Birthright, Jeff Johns in his run, Morrison in All-Star, kind of do find a nice middle ground of keeping kind of what Lex had become and also like retaining some aspects of what Lex was kind of in the earlier years.
Yeah, which I think is the perfect version of Lex, is to have both of those kind of identities together.
Yeah. Which makes me excited to see Nicholas Holt's portrayal of Lex, because
I'm so excited.
It seems like, at face value, it looks like a very kind of modern, kind of just kind of general take on Lex. But then I'm seeing stuff in the trailers where it's like, does he have a prison in another dimension? And is he like making little weird alien clones? And it's like, that's, I'm expecting there's going to be like a real like Silver Agey aspect to Lex, which like I'm all for.
That you brought it up, I'm going to tangent just for a quick second. In one of the trailers, this sold me. Like, I was sold on Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. I love Nicholas Hoult. But what sold me was, and it's actually something right out of All-Star Superman. There is, when, I can't remember who he's talking to, but somebody says Superman to Lex, and he has this little twinge in his eyebrow, and his eye twitches, and he says Superman, and his eye twitches, and that sold me. I was like, that's Lex Luthor. You got me there.
Because it's that clip in the trailer where he's in the Fortress of Solitude.
Yes.
With the engineer and with Ultraman. And it reminded me so much of his mannerisms in All-Star. Like I said, like his big speech at the end of issue 12 where he has his epiphany and the monologue he gives when he's on the electric chair. And when they're on like the little boat escaping after he breaks out of his death sentence, you can definitely see where Holt has like studied Lex and All-Star, which for me is like one of the best possible sources you could get to like really understand this character.
100%. All
right,
so I'm gonna
though that he's not. I'm sorry, I'm going on tangent.
No, go ahead.
I'm very sad though that he's not blowing people up with jars of piss.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Lex Luthor and what is that, Batman v Superman? Like, come on. That's definitive Lex Luthor right there.
That's what Lex does. He blows people up and he puts jars of piss on people's desks.
Of course. But yeah, so I'm just going to kind of rapid fire these a bit. What I find really interesting about this next point, and something I really like and is something that is featured in All-Star, a lot of the older concepts of pre-crisis Superman are reimagined or brought back. For instance, like the Fortress would be much similar to the pre-crisis version of the Fortress of Solitude. And the thing that I noted down that I thought was the most interesting, because it is something that is directly put into All-Star Superman, is, I cannot pronounce this for the life of me, but it is the thing that starts with Q. It is the idea for Superman 2000 was to have the Q world that is in All-Star Superman be in the Fortress in main continuity, and Superman would travel there as Hyperman, and that world was our world. It is a very Morrisonian concept, and it is something that they put in All-Star.
I'm trying to remember the pronunciation.
It's like
Q-W-E-W-Q. So it's a palindrome.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's that reveal in issue 10 of All-Star Superman. Like, also, issue 10 is my favorite single issue of any comic book ever.
It's incredible.
I think it's an absolute masterpiece. But that reveal at the end of that issue, that the kind of pocket universe Superman has made as a kind of test experiment to see if the world will survive without him, is our world, and it ends with Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster creating Superman. It's just like it's incredible. That is like Morrison at their absolute best. It's meta and it's clever and it's kind of nonsense, but it all makes sense in the end, and it's really sweet, and it's such like a homage to the character's history, and it's so brilliant that Mark Waid basically just ripped it off for the end of Irredeemable, which is another thing I think is really great too. And it makes me wonder, like, if that specific idea was going to be something that they both played around with in the Superman 2000 pitch, because they both around a similar time ended up using it in other stories.
Yeah, I love it, and I love that is one of the things that survived, and it is just in All-Star. Like the whole idea is in All-Star. It's not retooled or anything. That is just That's it. But yeah, so the last thing I want to talk about with the Superman Now pitch is the most famous thing that came out of this, the most famous what if, and the most controversial thing, and something that I think is very interesting because it did actually happen, but not to Superman. So the most controversial thing about this pitch was they were going to undo the marriage between Lois and Clark. And I'm going to tell you, listeners, and Owen, I'm sure you already know the story. This is how they were going to do it. And stop me when you hear something familiar. Lex Luthor and Brainiac reveal Superman's identity to the world and engineering an apocalyptic showdown. Lois and Clark are ultimately forced to barter away all knowledge of his secret and thereby their own relationship to Mr. Mxyzptlk. Does that sound a little familiar?
When they were presenting it in the office, just happened to be a budding young artist by the name of Joe Quesada. And Joe Quesada hung on to that idea for a decade and then retrofitted it into Spider-Man. And famously, a thing that no one ever got upset over and everyone was cool with. And still to this day, a great decision. And, we wouldn't have got Paul without it. So thank you, Grant Morrison, for giving us Paul.
It all circles back to Grant Morrison. So Spider-Man fans, blame Grant Morrison for the this undoing of the marriage.
Grant Morrison has never written Spider-Man in a comic ever.
Yeah.
Which is a fact that kind of blows my mind that they've never written Spider-Man. But now I'm understanding why. The legacy, they've kind of got a fifth-dimensional legacy on Spider-Man, if you will.
That's incredible. Wow. Okay. Wow, you just blew my mind there.
I also remember reading, and like I said, I don't have this up in front of me to verify, so this might just be me kind of misconstruing facts, that at one point the ending of Superman Red Son, where it's revealed that the story is kind of a time loop and Krypton is kind of the future Earth and the House of L is the long descendants of Lex Luthor. I remember reading at some point that was something that was toyed around with in the Superman 2000 pitch, because that has roots in some unused ideas from Joe Siegel and Joe Shuster, where they toyed with this idea of Krypton being Earth in the far, far future, or humans when they had moved to another planet millions of years in the future. But I don't remember if that made it into the final document that they submitted to DC. But I know that was something that was kind of bandied around, and then Miller kind of went and used it when he wrote Red Son. And it's
very
far and away the most interesting part of that book for me.
Very true. But yeah, and what's so interesting is that Morrison was actually hesitant about breaking up the marriage with this pitch, and I actually have it noted here that it was because of Miller and Mark Waid were hardcore about the relationship or the love triangle between Lois, Clark, and Superman. Yeah, and they thought that...
I was going to say that I feel like Waid would have been very pushed for that a lot. He seems to be very big on preferring an unmarried Superman.
Yeah. And they thought that the character's dynamic would be fundamentally incomplete without it, but Morrison really thought that the marriage could and should work. And later on, Morrison did a more refined version of the pitch where the name was changed to Superman Now as opposed to Superman 2000, where it was, again, largely Morrison-centric, and this was where the main inspiration for All-Star Superman came from. So that's the very interesting kind of origins of All-Star Superman. All of this leads to All-Star. So for listeners, I kind of want to go over what the All-Star line was, because that is another very interesting thing. We're almost an hour into this and haven't even gotten into the book, but a lot of the backstory is very integral to this comic.
Speed run through some of that if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So just kind of a final thing to add on to what you were saying about the Superman 2000 pitch was that so Morrison and Miller and Payer and Wade were asked to put this document together by Eddie Berganza, who was one of the Superman editors at the time. And so they went away, wrote this 21-page document, refined it, and then submitted it. And while Berganza, from what I can gather, was very much in favour and wanted to do it, he was kind of vetoed by the people above him and the rest of the Superman creative team. And so it kind of like fell away. I said Morrison refined it and rewrote it into the Superman Now pitch, which was a bit more of kind of a singular vision for a rebooted Superman.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't seem to kind of get any traction internally at DC. And then when it looked like the project was dead, different ideas from it were divided up into other books. Like there's elements of it that you can read in Mark Waid and Lionel Francis Yu's Birthright. Miller takes some aspects of it into Red Son, and Morrison kind of cannibalizes the rest into All-Star Superman. Now, the All-Star imprint was a thing DC devised around like 2004 and early 2005. And the idea was essentially that they wanted something that would compete with Marvel's Ultimate Universe, which had launched kind of 4 or 5 years earlier and had become this massive success. You know, books like Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley, Ultimate X-Men by Mark Miller and Adam and Andy Kubert were like these huge, you know, some of the best-selling books. And obviously Miller and Hitch's The Ultimates miniseries collection were big as well. And so DC were kind of looking over at that and thinking, okay, how do we counteract and have our own kind of new initiative that is, one, kind of easily approachable for new readers, and two, kind of fresh things up a little bit. So Morrison, in between kind of the Superman Now pitch falling apart and this, had gone over to Marvel, had done New X-Men, did the Marvel Knights Fantastic Four book and Marvel Boy and a couple of other things, and ends up coming back to DC after a kind of very public falling out with some of the higher ups at Marvel. And so Morrison comes back to DC in like early 2005 and basically gets the Jack Kirby deal. Basically gets, what do you want? And that's where you get things like Seven Soldiers. That's where you get things like Grant on Batman. And you also, this coincides with DC launching their All-Star label. And the idea of the All-Star label was, whereas the Ultimate Marvel Universe was an interconnected series of books, so like the world of Ultimate Spider-Man is the same world as Ultimate X-Men, is the same world as Ultimate Fantastic Four. Ironically, a series that Morrison did have a hand in developing early on, but never like committed to writing. Just going to put a pin in that. And the All-Star label was kind of going to be more self-contained, timeless stories, like the definitive tales for these characters written by some of the all-time great creators on the book. So like All-Star Batman and Robin, the idea originally was, well, let's reunite Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee, the duo that had just done Hush. Jeff Loeb dropped out, and then it was like, well, who's the greatest living Batman writer we can get? It's Frank Miller. So Frank Miller comes in and does the book. And famously, that book's amazing, and everyone loves it. And it every issue came out, and
then
Dragon Tattoo.
And then after that, the All-Star line just flourished. You know, it wasn't canceled after that.
Batman didn't say a lot of slurs in the first issue and the second issue, and he made a child eat rats. Though we did get that one great issue where Batman and Robin dress up in yellow and beat the crap out of Green Lantern.
That is so good.
Top 5 things Frank Miller ever wrote, in my opinion. I think that issue is hysterical.
It's so fun. That is also Jim Lee's best art ever. I mean, that whole series, that's the crazy thing. That is an incredible poster book.
That's the fun dichotomy of Jim Lee, is that like I'm not a big fan of Hush either. I think the original Hush,
I think it's all right,
is quite overrated, and it's never done much for me. So it's always really funny that like I think Jim Lee's 2 best projects are on books that he is carrying in a lot of ways.
I mean,
so alongside that, basically Morrison was asked if they'd like to do a Superman book with Frank Quitely, and it was out of continuity. It can just be like whatever you want. And it was kind of pitched as like doing for modern Superman what Alan Moore and Kurt Swan did back in like the pre-crisis era for whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And I think you can see a lot of similarities between that and All-Star.
Yes, of course.
And so Morrison kind of like reworks a lot of ideas they had laying around from the Superman Now pitch into this story of kind of an older Superman at the end of his life. And obviously we should note that in around 2004, Morrison's dad passed away, Walter Morrison, and that kind of very much shaped the direction that All-Star was going to be, where it's essentially the story of Superman finding out he has a year left to live and his adventures and his chronicles of trying to make the world a better place and figure out his legacy before he dies. So you can see kind of all of the areas in which this book came together and all the circumstances. And now, 53 minutes into this podcast, we can actually talk about the book.
Of course, and thank you. And no, that was incredible and very necessary because the making of this book is so fascinating. The last thing I just want to mention, and this is it before we get into the book, I have it noted here, but I think it's really funny. Everyone's favorite person, Dan DiDio, was actually the person that came up with the All-Star name. It was a play on the All-Star comics from back in the 40s, and Dan DiDio was actually the one to pitch the name All-Star Superman to Morrison, which is kind of funny because
and then Morrison brilliantly took it literally, in which the book is structured like the life cycle of a star, and Superman literally becomes the sun at the end of the book.
Yep. Just incredible.
He becomes the sun in a book that is also about fatherhood and mortality and legacy.
Yeah. Jimmy Olsen becoming Doomsday.
Hell yes.
Which is...
So how do you want to kind of... Obviously, this is a 12-issue book. I think some issues are more noteworthy and significant than others. So we can kind of, like, if you like, just thinking conscious of time, rapid fire through some of the issues and then kind of talk about some of our favourites and the most noteworthy.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I do want to start a little bit big picture about the book. I kind of want to talk about Morrison's like voice for Superman. So they, obviously, we kind of mentioned before like the whole cosplayer thing. Morrison met a Superman cosplayer walking around a con, and they state that this is like the most lifelike person to ever cosplay
Grant
Superman.
Kind of describes it as like having a shamanic moment where like Superman basically like jumped out of the page and had a conversation with them.
Yeah, and they interviewed Superman in character, and a lot of that cosplayer's responses and just kind of mannerisms were what Grant based this version of Superman off of. And Morrison identifies like many aspects of writing the character. They state that Superman is an act and the reporter Clark Kent is an act, and that there are two Clark Kents. One is a disguise, a bumbling, awkward mask for Superman, and the other is a confident, strong, good-hearted Clark Kent raised by Ma and Pa in Smallville. And Morrison believes that is the most real version of Clark Kent as a person. Like, that is the real person, is the one from Smallville, which I also kind of fall under that belief.
Yeah, it's
in
this idea
character.
that, like, you know, it's that idea of masking in situations that we all kind of like put in. It's obviously different degrees, put on different personas for different environments that we're in. Like when you're at work, you're a different person than you are when you're with your parents and when you're with your friends and when you're with, you know, partners or romantic interests and such. So it's that idea that like Superman is essentially what he puts on when he's going out. Clark Kent is what he puts on when he goes to work. And then the Superman that is, you know, there's that great moment in, I think it's in issue 10, where he's kind of just slouched on the chair in the Fortress of Solitude. That is the real Clark Kent, where he's just on his own, where there's no performance, there's no one watching him. I think it's just such a great read on the character.
Yeah, all right. So let's do your kind of plan. So we'll kind of go not really issue by issue, but we'll touch on each issue, and then our favorite issues will go a little bit more in depth. So obviously issue 1, you get the opening, which is one of the most famous pages in all of comics, and it is to me, the definitive retelling of the origin, because it is so quick. It is 4 panels. It's
8 words.
It's incredible. It's just Doom Planet, Desperate Scientist, Last Hope, Kindly Couple. You turn the page, you get a gorgeous double page spread of Superman flying in the sun, and honestly, that's all you need.
That could have been it. That could have been the entire series of All-Star Superman, and I would still say it's like a top 10 Superman book.
It's so good. Page. God, it's just so good. And this first issue is so much fun. This is mostly just setup, honestly. If you know, this is probably the least memorable issue, aside from that incredible opening 2 pages. A lot of this is just quick setup to why is Superman dying? Why is his powers so heightened? What's up with Lex Luthor? What's up with everybody at the planet? And then we just go, the issue ends, and we go from there. And that's, the issue ends. The ending of this issue is very famous as well. It is one of the things about this is that Morrison picks and chooses what they want with continuity. So in this continuity, Lois doesn't know that Superman and Clark are one and the same, and issue 1 ends with Clark revealing to Lois that he's Superman because he's only got 1 year to live. He's got to do it. It's time.
Yeah, the first issue is, I think, quite an underrated one because it is a lot of kind of, it's setting up the plot and the arc and the status quo of the story. But you get the great moment of Superman rescuing the astronauts.
Yeah.
And you get the introduction of Leo Quinton, who I think is such a fun and weird
Such
character.
An awesome character. I think that's Morrison's self-insert.
My favourite thing about the character of Dr. Leo Quinton is they never explain what his deal is.
He's just there.
And I've seen lots of different reads of who he is. I've seen reads that he's, a version of Lex Luthor that's come back in time to prevent what present day Lex is going to do. I've seen a read that he's Jimmy Olsen in disguise. I've seen a read that his costume and his design is based off Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. That he's a being of pure imagination, which is the most Morrisonian concept imaginable. But I just love that there's just this very Silver Age kind of character just hanging out, and he's just an accepted part of this world. And it makes me very angry that he didn't become a regular part of Superman books because he's so fun.
I love it so much.
Cool, Technicolor wizard, basically.
Yeah, I love it, and I'm glad you mentioned the Silver Age-ness of this because this entire comic is just a love letter to the Silver Age of Superman, which I love. I love Silver Age Superman. I think there's just so much fun things that came out of that.
It's very much an ode to that era of there's a lot of good things that came out of Byrne's Superman and of the modern Superman that evolves post Byrne, but it did kind of remove some of the more fantastical and sci-fi elements of the character.
Yeah,
there's a great kind of documentary that was released alongside the animated movie that Dwayne McDuffie wrote of All Star, and there's a great passage in that you'll have seen. Anyone listening this far into this podcast will have already seen, where Morrison says that the great Superman stories are all very relatable human stories, just told on this cosmic scale. A story with Krypto is basically a story about a guy going on a walk with his dog. Superman has to go to the fifth dimension and fight Mr. Mxyzptlk is essentially the story of someone going to see an estranged relative and all these other things. And it's All-Star is not only kind of a throwback and a homage to the Silver Age, to that kind of Mort Weisinger era of Superman comics, but it's also a celebration of that approach to Superman where it's there's a limit, anything could happen. It's limitless potential. We're not bound by the kind of shackles of reality in a way that the kind of Byrne archetype of Superman was much more grounded and relatable and tangible, where Morrison is kind of no, Superman is a sci-fi character and is wacky and bombastic and silly. And let's kind of push that to its extreme, which is an approach that I really love.
Yeah, me too. I think Morrison and Quitely find that balance of mixing the classic Silver Age Superman and the modern post-crisis John Byrne Superman, and you get the perfect ideal version of this character and his world, which I love so much. Issue 2 is a favorite of mine. Issue 2 and 3, it's the Lois Lane two-parter. And, issue 2 is mostly just Lois and Clark kind of Lois and Superman, because Lois does not believe that Clark is Superman, which I think is hilarious. I think it's a funny running joke throughout this entire book. But Lois and Superman just spending a day at the Fortress, and we get to explore this version of the Fortress of Solitude, which, like we mentioned earlier, is basically this version of the Fortress is basically taken from that Superman Now pitch, where it is essentially the bringing back a lot of aspects of the Silver Age version of the fortress. We get a lot of sciencey stuff. It's less, there's no crystals to be seen.
Yeah,
it's all
just like,
trophies and cool stuff.
And there's the giant key, and there's robots hanging around in little capes, and it is just this like this almost like little science den.
I love it. This is my fortress. This is my favorite version. It reminds me, I mean, and it is essentially the same or more or less the same fortress as in Alan Moore's and Kurt Swan's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, where it's like you said, it's a lot of science doohickeys and hidden rooms.
It's basically like Superman's man cave. It's like where he puts all of his trophies and his stuff and his memorabilia and his swag. Like it's just like a little like collection of all of his like. But it's a great thing from a world building perspective. It's like when you see the Batcave, and there's the dinosaur and the giant penny and all the Robin suits and stuff. It's just a great visual way of kind of like catching the reader up to speed of saying that this is a fully formed Superman that has lived a life, that has been on all these adventures. He's got the bottled city of Kandor. He's got robots. He's got all these things you'd expect from a Superman that has been around for however many years. Mm-hmm. And it's also just fun and silly.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about, I mean, and this is you get this out of a Grant Morrison book. You have them writing a comic, you're gonna get this, and that is there are little things that are just offhandedly mentioned in this issue that are major players later on in the series. You see Superman kind of toying around with this little gun that he later uses against Lex Luthor in issue 12. You have the world that I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce that starts with Q, just sitting in the corner. It's Earth Q. Yeah, just sitting in the corner, and no one talks about it. It's just, there's a panel that I'm looking at right now of Clark just kind of showing everything off to Lois, and Earth Q is just sitting there. Just in the corner.
Something I really love about Morrison's Superman, it's something I've been thinking about, again, in conjunction with Action Comics, is, and this is going to sound like a really strange thing to praise them on, is how many kind of outlandish concepts they don't explain.
Yeah.
Like, Superman has created a little pocket universe, and it's just there, and at no point did he ever explain, like, how he made it or what its purpose is until, like, issue 10. And they do stuff like that in Action Comics as well, where Superman will do these things and encounter these beings and things that are so like high concept and dense, and you could write a 6-issue miniseries explaining, but it's just like a really offhand. And it's this idea that like, because we're following Superman's perspective, this is just normal everyday stuff for him. This is exciting for Superman as like you trying to explain to someone what your dining table is. It's just like, yeah, this is just a part of the house. This is just like, yeah, this is my oven, this is my microwave. It's just like Superman, like, yeah, these are my robots, and this is my pocket universe that I created. There's something about the way Morrison handles Superman from a world building perspective, where they take these like so fantastical and high concept things and treat them like they're so ordinary and normal. Because in Superman's mind, they're just part of the furniture.
Yeah, I love it. You know, he's like, Lois is talking to this hologram, and Superman's just like, oh, that's Cal Kent from like a billion years in the future. Exactly. He'll come up in issue 6. Don't worry about it yet. I love it so much. And one of my favorite things about this issue, and I'm actually going to reference, and I'll also link this down in the show notes as well, Brad and Lisa Gullickson from Comic Book Couples Counseling actually interviewed Grant Morrison not too long ago. And Grant talks about one of my favorite moments in this issue, and it's where Clark is in his little secret room, and Lois kind of peeks into it, and Clark's like, oh no, get out of there. And Morrison kind of talks about how, you know, in someone like a cynical person's head, you know, that's where Superman keeps like his porno magazines and all his dirty stuff. But then Morrison's like, no, Superman's actually in there, like, playing with his action figures and having fun. Like, I love that so much. I don't. It's just that it's like a little
Yeah,
detail that I just love.
It's almost like his little like guilty pleasure room where he's like,
Yeah,
it's where he's got like his little wrestling ring and his action figures and his retro games consoles, things that he would never like put on display when he has a girl over.
yeah, and I mean later on we find out that Superman was making Lois's birthday present, which is a perfect segue into the next issue, which is a favorite of mine, and it's such a fun issue. Lois has Superman's powers for 24 hours, and Samson and Atlas show up, and it's basically an issue.
Samson and Atlas
just out of nowhere.
Are we going to explain it? No, this is just a regular thing.
You know, they all know each other already. Like Lois has met them.
Yeah. To Grant, this is just like, this is like Superman's cousins visiting from another city.
Yeah.
This is
I love it.
Samson and Atlas are here, and they have to fight the Sphinx.
It's incredible. And Lois's costume is incredible. I love this design. It's so fun. It's so iconic. And yeah, this issue is just so much fun. I love how like sassy Lois is. She's just letting the three men just kind of bumble around and be dumb. And she's just kind of along for the ride, just watching them. It's so much fun. There's that moment where they're arm wrestling at the beach or something, and the rock falls off the rock falls on Lois's head and just breaks in half, and she's just like, "What the hell?" It's so good. I love it so much.
It's such a balance between like such a fun and like sincere story of this like superpowered couple, or of like Lois getting to see the world through Superman's eyes, which then becomes a really powerful thing at the end of the book. But then you've got Samson gives Lois a necklace and it's made of like radioactive crown jewels. The Ultra Sphinx shows up and he's searching for the jewels of Atom Hotep. And like it's just like all of these words are nonsense, and I love it so much. And I love like this weird, like, for lack of better words, like this weird dick measuring contest between Superman and Samson and Atlas. It's such a fun issue. Like, there's not a bad issue in this book, and I think that they're all incredible, so fun.
Yeah, and we get some. I mean, later on in the issue, one of the most iconic moments and just one of my favorite images from this book is that beautiful splash page of Lois and Clark kissing on the moon. And it's Frank Quitely, again, like I said earlier, like an hour ago into this episode, is my favorite comic book artist. And one of the things that I think Quitely is the best at in comics, period, is portraying movement. And this is one of those cases where you can see Clark lifting Lois off the ground and her feet kicking dust off the moon.
But you can feel it.
It's incredible, and I'll get to this like when we get to more action-oriented issues, but actually I'll get to it right now because issue 4 is the issue of Jimmy Olsen becoming Doomsday, which is a lot of fun. Jimmy Olsen has this series of articles that he does, the day in the life, where he takes the role of whatever and writes an article about it. And in this case, it is your favorite character. Do you want to talk about this issue a bit? Because I feel like this is a favorite of yours.
It's not one of my absolute favorites, but like, there's not a bad issue in this. I will say, if you want more on this issue, my friend Doug from For Every Kind of Geek did a dedicated, because he is like the Jimmy Olsen super fan.
He's the Jimmy Olsen guy.
He did a really great video just breaking down this one issue on his channel, so I definitely go and check that out. But it's like Jimmy turns into Doomsday and becomes a big monster because like Leo Quinton like leaves him in charge of his like secret project, and there's like a door that says like "Don't open until Doomsday" on it, and Jimmy's like, "Ooh, what's in here?" He like goes through like a portal or whatever.
It's incredible. I love it so much.
It's such a silly.
It is. I mean,
But it's
I
really
get like
sweet, like the end of the issue where Jimmy writes like that love letter to his girlfriend on the moon.
Oh yeah,
Like it's
it's
such a tender and such a lovely issue, and it's ultimately like where issues 2 and 3 are about Superman's connection with Lois and his love and his relationships in a romantic sense. This is that from a platonic sense of Superman's, his pal, his best friend, his kind of like his like the person that Clark feels he can be the most open and vulnerable to in a lot of ways, even in some instances more so than with Lois. Like I think Jimmy is like the one character that Clark can be, that third Clark Kent that we talked about, the one that's not putting on a character or an act. Jimmy is probably the character that's seen that the most. So the fact he gets a spotlight issue here that's full of like Black Kryptonite and Doomsdays, and there's like a load of Bizarro guys show up, and Jimmy's writing love letters on the moon. Like it's silly, and it's so fun, and it's a beautiful, beautiful comic.
And I love this version of Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy is a fashion guru. He's like a modern day influencer. He does day in the life of whatevers, and he's a fashion guru.
He's like a
and
vlogger almost. It's like
it's again Morrison playing 5D chess, galaxy brain, looking into the future. Basically inventing the modern day social media influencer in this comic.
Yeah, he's just this like Jimmy's just kind of this like lovable scamp that's like always getting himself into hijinks and schemes. I keep joking in the trailer for the new movie that like that kaiju that Superman fights should just be Jimmy after he like drunk a strange potion.
That's
the kind of thing that Morrison would write, and it's I don't have a huge amount to say on this issue, and especially considering there are issues coming up, that I do have big monologues to talk about planned. It's just such a fun story, and it builds that idea of like showcasing Superman's relationship with humanity through the characters he's closest with. And I think going from the 2 issues with Lois, one focusing on Lois and Clark, the other focusing on Lois and Superman, into Jimmy, and then into the Lex issue 5, and then into the Jonathan Kent issue in issue 6. Mm-hmm. They are all like, that's a 5-issue stretch that are all about Superman's relationship with his closest characters.
Yeah. So issue 5, this is my favorite issue. This is one of my favorite single issues of comics ever. I just want to quickly read off the first page because it is maybe one of my favorite. This is such an incredible way to showcase Lex Luthor. It's Lex Luthor standing on trial, and the judge just saying, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Al Capone, Adolf Hitler, Lex Luthor. That is that's like so that good. Is for
Lex what the opening pages of issue 1 is for Superman.
And that's the first page of this issue. It's just that, and like that's it. That is Lex Luthor, and he's just standing there, just blank face, like yeah, that's me.
Like he's almost reveling in it. It's so fun.
And to be like, this is the definitive Lex Luthor story, and it's just one issue. Like this.
Yeah, like if you need to give someone a comic to like show them who Lex is as a character, I think this is as good as anything you could possibly give them. He's
so petty and just angry, and it's incredible. Like the judge is saying like you are up for trial again for crimes against humanity, and Lex is the first thing he says is Superman made me do it. He should be on trial here. And it's like, yeah, this guy is so petty. He could do anything. He is a genius. He's rich. He has resources. He could fix the world. But all he hyperfixates on is this alien who is seemingly perfect.
That's something that comes back at the end of the book where Superman gives that amazing monologue where it's like, if you could just get over the fact that you just do not like this one guy, you could have saved the world and you could have been the hero that you see yourself as. But you're just so much of a petty arsehole that you will like dedicate your entire life to just spiting this one guy for having the audacity to just be nice.
Yeah. And So this issue, Lex is brought to jail. He is on death row. And this is basically just Clark Kent coming in to interview Lex Luthor. And one of my favorite details, and this is actually later on in the issue, Lex says to Clark, he says, Clark, I love you. He says, like, Clark, I like you. You're nothing like Superman. You could never be, you're like a bumbling idiot. Superman's not like that. I can be myself around you. And it's like the irony in that, like, this guy is so smart. He hates Superman so much. He studies him. Superman is right next to him this entire time. And it's just the irony in that.
But it's also the thing. It's also the thing that, like, if Lex actually like thought about it logically, he probably would get along with Superman because he gets along with Clark.
He would.
Well.
That's the irony. It's genius.
By his own like bigotry and his anger that he can't see that. But I also love this idea that like Lex is like one of the smartest men in the world, and he can't tell that this is Superman stood right in front of him. But I love that Clark in this issue is portrayed as like extra bumbling and cartoonish. Like he's bordering on being a caricature in this issue, but in a really smart way. Like there's the bit where like he steps on Lex's gun and like breaks it, but secretly the gun was about to like break, and he saved Lex's life with it. Like there's a clear like methodology to everything Clark does, but he is so like it's so slapstick and cartoony. And the way he quietly pencils it is just tremendous.
Yeah, this is the issue to showcase like why Quitely is just one of the greatest to ever do it. And like I said earlier, I think Quitely's the only person to really nail down that difference between Clark and Superman. They look like two completely different characters, and this issue showcases that the best. I mean, just the posture, the hair, everything about it, the mannerisms, facial expressions, everything. And one of my favorite moments in this issue too is you got Lex just working out. He's doing every workout like under the sun, and he's doing some Olympic weightlifting. He's doing some running, some boxing, and then he goes up to Clark, and he's like, "Feel my muscles. This is real muscle. This is work right here, not like fake muscles like Superman has." Jock. He's like a little child. He's like a little angry 10-year-old, and I think that's so perfect.
I love how Morrison writes Lex as so pathetic. Like he is so pathetic and so embarrassing and so cringe. But for a character that is filled with so much like masculinity and macho, and sees himself as this kind of like the ideal man, that in reality he's just kind of cringe and embarrassing, and he's so like he's overcompensating and tries too hard. Like you said, the bit where he's like going up to Clark and he's flexing and telling him how big his muscles are, it's just like, dude, just get a grip. It's so fun. What's
again Morrison and their galaxy brain? This is just Elon Musk and Andrew Tate. Yes. And that group of people nowadays, like that is exactly.
There's so much of like Andrew Tate in Morrison's Lex.
It's really
you are
crazy,
such a fragile baby, wrapping yourselves in this like veneer of hypermasculinity to overcompensate for the fact that you are so insecure about who you are, and the way that like this issue just cuts to the core of who Lex Luthor is.
It's incredible,
so brilliant.
Yeah, and we get that moment with the Parasite and breaking in, and obviously Clark's there, and Parasite feeds off of energy and Superman. Now since the first issue, encountering the sun and all that, his powers have heightened to great effects, and is also killing him. And Parasite has never been around Superman at this level of power yet, so he just grows huge and monstrous. And we get that incredible moment where the gases, there's a tear gas going off, and one of the inmates picks up a gun and is about to shoot Lex in the head, and then Clark does a strategic bumble and trip and knocks the guy out, saving Lex's life, which is just a fun detail that I love.
It's a tremendous issue.
It's incredible.
It's so funny. Like, there's not an issue in this book where if someone said, this is my favorite comic book ever, I wouldn't just completely get it.
Yeah, it's every single one. And, we get at the end of the issue, it's just showing Lex's just fragile, self-esteem. His little trusty steed, the goth girl, I think it's his niece. She tells him, like, Lexi, his eyebrow burned off, and he draws a little eyebrow and he makes it, like the rock smolder, and it's so great. I love it so much. This is my favorite issue.
That Lex is like so protective of what remaining hair he has that like the thought of losing his eyebrows is so like demoralizing.
It's the worst thing in the world to happen,
It's all he's got.
All right, so I want to give you the floor to talk about issue 6, which you did mention is your second favorite. So why? I also love this issue. This is like top 3 of the 12 for me. But why do you love this issue so much?
So issue 6 is, for anyone not following along, this is the Jonathan Kent issue. This is the kind of flashback. It's subtitled Funeral in Smallville. And this is my second favorite issue of the entire book and probably my top 5 like single issue comics ever. I think it's like, without kind of doing too much kind of like parasocial stuff, I think this is the most... This issue helped me really like understand Grant Morrison a lot in a really kind of in a deeper way, especially knowing the context in which All Star was made, which was written after kind of their father passed away, and the Grant's kind of process of handling that grief and that loss, and focusing so much on memory and legacy and kind of how you remember people that aren't with you anymore, was channeled into the spirit of this book. It's the whole reason why this book is about Superman dying, this almost like impenetrable father figure to the world, and how we as these very like almost childlike humans have to come to terms with the fact that he's not going to be around anymore. There is no guarantee that Superman will always be there to protect us. And I think that like the themes of the book are most evident and most prominent in this issue, which is, this is the midway point of the series, and the plot essentially follows Superman disguises himself in bandages and travels back in time to the day that Jonathan Kent has his heart attack. And we kind of see the story from a young Clark's perspective when he's kind of like Superboy, where he has a battle with a giant cosmic meatball called the Chronivore. Aided by a group of random supermen from the future.
That we met in issue 2.
That show up in issue 2, and, half of this is like a weird backdoor pilot to Superman 1 Million. And it's also kind of like the actual end of the book, given who one of the Supermen is. That we then see later. I would actually argue that this, when you read All-Star Superman, after you read issue 12, you should go back and read issue 6 again, because this is the real ending of the series.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a moment in this book that has stuck with me ever since I first read it, which is, we get the big kind of silly cosmic action fight of Superboy and the Superman squad fighting the Chronivore, which is this like weird, like circular little Tasmanian devil monster that eats time. And as the story goes, Superman hears Jonathan Kent's heart stop in the distance, and he races back to the farm, and the Chronivore eats the exact amount of seconds it would take for him to get back there. And not save his dad, but just be there with him as he dies. And he gets there just too late. And there's that amazing speech that young Clark gives at his funeral. But my favourite moment in the entire book is during this big fight, it cuts back to the farm, and Jonathan and the disguised Superman from the present day are just stood in like the porch or in the front yard. They're just stood chatting, looking up at the stars. And, it's never said if Jonathan knows that this is Clark or not. I kind of get the vibe that he does know deep down, but they never address it, because a parent always knows their kid.
Yeah.
I think that like deep down, Jonathan knows that this is Clark, but they never have to say it to each other. It's a much deeper kind of connection. But they're just kind of stood there talking, and he says to him, like, will the boy be okay? And he says, it all turns out right in the end. And that is basically like the last conversation Jonathan has with anyone before he has his heart attack. And I love this in the context of the story, because it's like Superman doesn't travel back in time to save Jonathan Kent, he does it to basically have one last conversation with him at a time where he's really struggling with his own mortality and the realization that he's going to die. And so he basically like goes back to have an assurance with his dad on the day of his death to learn that this is a natural part of life and this is okay. And it's not necessarily a tragic thing to die. It's just a thing that happens, and it's natural and it's beautiful and it's sad and it's heartbreaking, but it's also like what it creates in memory and legacy is really powerful and an important part of life. And then like the ending always cuts me up when Superboy is, after the funeral, he goes back to the farm and the Superman squad from the future are all there, and Clark unbandages himself and reveals himself to be kind of our protagonist from the rest of the book. And then there's this kind of like golden god Superman who's just kind of like hanging out in the background. And spoilers for 6 issues time, but that is what our Superman will become at the end of this series. This is his kind of like Superman's final form, if you will, from long, long in the future. And he delivers this kind of golden flower from New Krypton that he lays on Jonathan's grave. And I don't have the comic in front of me, but he basically says like, in memory of everything that once was, will be, and ever will be. All it's past, present, and future all coming together at once. And I just love this issue so much. Like, I think this is the first time I've been able to talk about it without crying, which I'm really proud of myself for. But yeah, it's wonderful. It's so, especially like if you read it through the context of what Grant was going through at the time this book was made, and how, it's a perfect microcosm of the book's entire themes about grappling with these ideas of mortality and death and legacy and loss, and that learning that it's okay, that death is a natural part of life, and even Superman shouldn't be afraid of death, and even Superman, even it happens to an immortal being like Superman. I think like the big themes and ideas that permeate throughout this book are most strongly articulated in this issue, and I think it's the most important issue of the book in terms of like, because the first 6 issues, we've talked about them, are really, really fun. They're these kind of like slice of life stories of like a day in the life of Superman, showcasing different characters that are like super important to his everyday, like Lois and Jimmy and Lex and Jonathan Kent in this instance. But this is where the book seems to take a much more serious and somber tone as we go into the rest of the series. Like, not that it ever stops being cosmic and Silver Age and wacky, but it's kind of underpinned by a much more serious undertone of like, Superman's clock is ticking. Like, we are running out of time for all of the silly hijinks and the adventures, which can then take us into the rest of this book where Superman is getting closer and closer to death. Yeah.
And I mean, the only thing that I want to add, and something that I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, is I think that this is a perfect showcase of why Frank Quitely is the best at showcasing movement and action in comics.
Like,
and
the sequences of Clark like racing back to the farm to try and save his dad in time, it's just, you couldn't pick a better artist to kind of bring that to life.
It's I always, the 2 examples I always tell people when I talk about Frank Quitely, it's this issue, and then it's also Batman and Robin Reborn. And the reason why his portrayal of movement is so effective is that he shows right before the action and then immediately after the action or the impact. So, in this, when Superboy is fighting Superman 1,000,000, you get this moment where they're flying into a building, and we see the moment when, we get the action line and they're right about to hit the building, and then the next panel is the immediate aftermath. The building's already exploded, and Superboy and Superman 1,000,000 are flying in the other direction. And it's that little detail that just makes it so effective. And it's something that I only ever see Frank Quitely do. Another example would be in Batman and Robin Reborn, in that opening issue where Batman and Robin are flying the Batmobile and they shoot a missile at a car, and you see the missile about to hit the car, and then the next panel is the car flying in the distance and the explosion. And that detail is why Morrison is the master of action and movement in comics. And it's something that I don't ever really see other artists do. And yeah, it's just,
Yeah, no,
that's why.
it's incredible, and it shows that Quietly is like the perfect person to be drawing this book, and alongside
Yeah.
like Jimmy Grant's just brilliant colors.
Yeah, the
Like, there's
colors
so
are,
much. This book is so vibrant and bright, and the way that that's juxtaposed with like the Chronivore stuff with the Superman squad is so like
yeah.
bombastic and bright colored, and then it cuts to the stuff with Clark and Jonathan Kent, where you get a lot of the blues and the browns and the greys. It's just masterful.
Yeah. So we'll talk about 7 and 8 together because it is a two-parter. This is like all the Bizarro stuff. Issue 7 kind of opens with this really fun action scene of Superman in space, and he gets bombarded by a bunch of Bizarros, and he crash lands on Earth, and we get this kind of crazy, it's kind of like a zombie apocalypse of Bizarros on the streets, just kind of tormenting
I love
people.
the little detail that like Steve Lombard is just like weirdly immune to.
Because he takes steroids.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I love that. But yeah, that kind of leads to Superman being trapped on Bizarro World, which a lot of people don't like this issue, and I found that out years after reading this book multiple times.
I think,
which
issue 8
it's crazy.
Is wonderful. Like
I love issue 8.
Is one of the most like tender and emotional things Morrison's ever written.
It's incredible. I love Zabaro as a character, and you know, it's this tale of somebody who is an outsider. Like it is another kind of Superman tale of you have this outsider that is trying to find a way to fit in, and he has all these people around him that are just completely different. And you know, Zabaro is the only person on Bizarro World who has, you know, I guess higher thinking would be, I don't know if that's the correct term to use, but yeah, he's an anomaly. He's much smarter.
He's kind of ostracized on his world for that, but that becomes very useful in Clark's mission to kind of get home. No, it is. It's like, it's such a tender and human story of this character who, much like Superman in a lot of ways, feels like an outcast and feels like there's, you know, that there's something wrong with him, and that he is this kind of outcast in his world, and how he's, you know, the way Superman kind of very humanizes and speaks to him and relates to him on a very emotional level, and gives him that kind of that companionship and that friendship that Zabaro maybe has never had, being this kind of like this anomaly on Bizarro World. I think it's just a really sweet and tender and earnest story. I think like the ending, like when Superman is like shot home and Zabaro is giving him a little wave, just like violently sobbing all over the cover of the comic when I'm reading that. It's just a really beautiful issue. And the fact that there are people out there that do not like this issue makes my blood boil.
I mean, if you think that the Bizarro speak is confusing, try reading Morrison's Green Lantern, where they just make up a language and have that be all the dialogue for an entire, like, two-parter. But yeah, I love this issue. This is a favorite of mine. I love Zabaro. I think it's so interesting, and, you know, Morrison takes that idea that Bizarro World is, you know, opposite from ours, and, you know, they expand that into the societal kind of norms of Bizarro World, where, you know, somebody that is a little more articulate and, you know, has a higher brain capacity, for lack of a better term, is seen as an outsider and is hated by everybody else. It's so interesting, and, you know, leave it to Morrison to come up with these just crazy ideas.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a wonderful story. It's like with pretty much every issue of this book, this could have been its own series, and you could have done 6 issues of just this, and I would have read it and probably have loved it. And there's enough material in these 2 issues that you could have told a 6-issue or even like a 10-issue maxi series of, and I wouldn't have complained. But it's just like a little slice of life in the Chronicles of Superman.
Yeah, which is kind of a perfect segue into issue 9, which is an issue that I think could have been like a 12-issue maxi series. It's Superman returns from Bizarro World, and he's been gone for like 6 months, and the Earth is completely changed. Two Kryptonians who we find out that they are two Kryptonians that were famous on Krypton. They were famous explorers that got lost in space, and they've landed on Earth finally, and they've kind of taken over.
Yeah.
And
they're kind of almost these like, I'm trying to remember the names of like the I wouldn't call them like colonialists, but they are these kind of like old timey explorers. Like there's almost like a weird like Pocahontas undertone of like these guys just showing up on Earth and being like, "This is ours now, and we are going to like rebuild it in our image." And yeah, we see how like Metropolis, that page where Superman comes back and Metropolis just looks like Krypton now is just so funny and jarring. And the fact that they've like moved into the Fortress of Solitude and like gotten rid of all of Superman's stuff and like it's such a fun. And then but it's a really sweet issue again. Like
this is the one that always gets me.
Yeah.
This is the one where I always tear up. I didn't tear up this time reading it just because I saw it coming. But we learned that they were similar to Superman. They have like this rapid kind of cellular decay, where in this instance
it said that they have like kryptonite poisoning.
Yeah,
like, overexposure to kryptonite as they've been like traveling the universe. They've basically got like a form of like Kryptonian cancer, basically.
Yeah, and it's rapid. They've when they're fighting Superman, there's a moment where one of them falls, and then the other one is unable to see, and Superman brings them to the fortress and, hooks up some scientific doohickey on their head so that they can, telepathically communicate. And Superman puts them into the Phantom Zone to kind of like freeze their physical bodies so that later on he can try to find a cure for them and come back to that. And there's this just beautiful kind of moment where they hold hands and Superman sends them into the Phantom Zone saying, the Phantom Zone will finally have some law and order. And then you just get this incredible splash page of the two of them hovering over all the Phantom Zone prisoners.
It's really, really sweet issue. Like this idea of like these two soulmates that have like, traversed the universe after their world was destroyed, and all that they've had to kind of survive by at this point is each other and their love, kind of like relying on the kindness of Superman to kind of give them one last adventure, basically going into heaven, as it's presented in this instance.
Yeah.
It's such a really, really sweet and tender and emotional story. It's beautiful. It's the weird juxtaposition this entire book goes through, where it's like it's so silly and fun and wacky and fantastical, but it's also, when you think about what these issues are about, will just make you bawl your eyes out. This is essentially an old couple at the end of their lives choosing to kind of go off into the sunset together, and Superman kind of helps them along their way. It's also really poetic that these are Kryptonians as well, as he's kind of the other Kryptonian in this book dealing with his own mortality. To see these two people accept that they're probably going to die and that this is it for them, but as long as they've got the love and the humanity, that they're okay with it, I think very much kind of navigate Superman's arc going into the remaining 3 issues.
Yeah, and now we get to the big one, issue 10, arguably the most famous issue in this entire run. You mentioned earlier this is your favorite single issue comic of all time. So yeah, like why this issue?
This issue is, I'm basic. This is my favorite comic book ever.
It's incredible.
It's just there's so much I love in this issue. Like,
it's dense.
One of the things that always gets me like a little teary-eyed is when Superman is at the children's hospital.
Oh God, this always gets me too.
And all the kids' drawings of Superman.
Like, it's on the wall, on the pillows.
Yeah, all the little drawings of Superman that the kids do, just like, I remember reading the first time I read this digitally, and I could like properly like zoom in and like look at all the photos. Just, oh, it was an absolute mess. And the image of like him like carrying the school bus through Egypt and showing them the pyramids and all the wonders of the world is, oh, it's beautiful. So yeah, this issue is kind of framed as like a day in the life of Superman. It's told throughout the course of a single day, and it's all of the like the little things that Superman does that you wouldn't normally get to see. All the things he does in between fighting Doomsdays and Lex Luthors. And it's kind of intercut with Superman's basically making this like pocket universe. He creates this Earth Q, and the idea is that like it will essentially do a simulation of the entirety of the universe's history in a single day, so that Superman can see what a world without him would be like. Like, will a universe survive without Superman? So he basically creates this like living thought experiment. And so like the book's intercut, like Superman goes on his heroics. We get obviously the incredibly famous moment where he saves the girl that's about to commit suicide.
The most famous page in a Superman comic, period.
Like quite comfortably and for good reason. It's
incredible,
beautiful, beautiful moment, and it's like it's maybe the most pure and perfect distillation of who Superman is.
Yeah,
I've ever seen. And all these stuff are intercut with us seeing Earth Q's development and all of the different like technological and societal advances. So we see all of these different like huge moments in human achievement and history over the course of a single day. And the thing that always gets me is when we get to, and it's famous, Superman comes back to the Fortress of Solitude and he's writing his last will and testament. There's that great speech where he says, like, to Lois Lane, I leave our future, which is one of the best lines ever written into a comic book, I feel.
And foreshadowing.
We see we cut back into the pocket universe and we see like Friedrich Nietzsche writes the Spark Zarathustra, which is a really significant text because it's where the word Superman comes from, and it's where this idea of Nietzsche's idea of a Superman in a very like basic and 101 sense is that like this strong man will emerge from somewhere upon us and will kind of be the perfect man, will have all of the best parts of humanity, but won't carry any of the hatred or the bigotry or the jealousy or the greed that we're all kind of befallen by, and will lead us into a new age of prosperity, will guide us into the sun, if you will, which obviously is hammered home in Jor-El's speech in the last issue. So the fact that is there, I think, is really cool. And then like the end of the issue. So it's kind of framed as like all of the great achievements in human civilization, all, man creating fire, discovering the wheel, Nietzsche and Shakespeare and all these great things. And then the last thing we see is in a tiny little apartment somewhere in Ohio. You don't even see it, you just see the outside of the building and you see the sketch. Yeah. These two kids, and one of them says to the other, like, this time right here, it's going to change everything. And it's Jerry Siegel and it's Joe Shuster.
Yeah.
And they've drawn like the Action Comic, the sketch of Superman in Action Comics #1. And
it's incredible.
I love this issue so much because it's like, there's a passage in Morrison's book Super Gods that I think about a lot, where Grant talks about how Superman is real. And the logic they use is that like, Grant says that like more people in the world know who Superman is than I am. More people would recognize Superman than I am. Superman has saved more people's lives in the real world than he probably has in the fictional world. There are so many people out there whose lives have been bettered and helped by the presence of Superman, either as a comic book character, as a movie, or just as a concept. Like Superman is a thing that a lot of real people find a lot of hope and resilience and power in. Mm-hmm. And Morrison says that, like, in true Morrisonian fashions, as Superman exists in the second dimension, he is this kind of he's out of reach to us, but because we have created him, he's real. And like my favorite quote of Morrison's ever is that idea of like, somewhere in our darkest nights we created the idea of a man that would never let us down. And it's this idea that like in Superman's darkest moment, in his most insecure moment, where he just needs that assurance that everything is going to be okay, he creates us. And seeing us kind of prosper in a world where Superman isn't like a real physical presence, but is an idea and is a concept. He is knowing that Superman as an idea is just as powerful as Superman as a person. Is kind of what gives him the assurance to go into what he does in the last couple of issues. And I think it's such a beautiful idea of like, we find strength and power and entertainment and inspiration in reading Superman stories and watching Superman movies and playing Superman games and, playing with Superman action figures. And yet Superman, the fictional character, at the same time needs us just as much as we need him. Like, it's such a Morrison thing to do, but that means so much to me, and I think it's so beautiful.
That is beautiful, and I mean, I don't have much to say after that. That was beautiful. But I think the last thing that I'll say about this issue, which will perfectly segue into the next two, is the moment with Lex Luthor, and this again just perfectly encapsulates like what this character is. And Superman goes to prison. Lex Luthor has a couple days left on death row, and he says to Lex, "I'm dying. It's your fault. You're the reason why I'm dying. You have 3 weeks left before they execute you. I challenge you to do everything that you said that you're gonna do to save the world in that 3 weeks." And Lex walks up to the plexiglass and spits in Superman's face. And that just shows, like, this guy is so petty. All he does is hate, like, he has all the resources, all the power, the brains, the money in the world to do what he says he can do. But he hates Superman so much that he's just not going to do it. And it's one page, it's brilliant, and that brings us to the final two issues, which is the Lex-centric stuff, the big finale. Lex drinks the Superman potion, the 24-hour potion. We don't explain how he gets it, just comic book shenanigans, doesn't matter. But what does matter is that he gets it. They turn the electric chair on. We think he's dead. His head rises. He goes on a little monologue and kills everybody in the room and escapes.
Awesome. It's so perfectly illustrated by Quietly. It reminds me a lot of, in the way it's framed, of the scene in The Dark Knight Returns where the Joker's on the talk show.
Yes, that's such a good pull. It always reminds me
of that, and I feel like they're kind of similar moments in a sense, but it's like this like huge reveal and coming out party of the villains, like the biggest scheme imaginable. Like this is their magnum opus moment. I don't think it's like an intentional thing, but I always like get a similar sense from like what Miller and Janssen were doing with Joker in that story, where this is his like big last stand, and with what Morrison and Quietly do with Lex in issue 11.
Yeah, and Lex is just he doesn't even know how to handle the power. He's just like, the power, I could stop bullets with my hand. It's just incredible. And this issue, we have that kind of cold open with Lex, and this issue is mostly just Superman at his weakest point, kind of his last few days. There's this big crazy plot that's kind of like in the background throughout the entire series that's like really coming to a head in these last two issues, where a rogue sun from the future has come to destroy our sun and kind of like wipe out Earth or whatever. And Superman, this is his last mission, is to fight this rogue sun and save the planet Earth. And that's basically what Superman is gearing up for and is doing in this entire issue. He fights it, and it crash lands on Earth. While at the same time, Lex and his niece, his goth niece, are rampaging throughout the streets and causing, chaos.
Just causing mayhem. It's just senseless violence.
Just, just because. And, Clark and the sun crash land on Earth, and Clark, he defeats it. It's this really awesome moment where, again, you get before the impact and then after the impact, where Clark is about to punch the sun, and you get this like little mushroom, this like mini mushroom cloud in the next panel that I love. And then, we get Clark goes to the Daily Planet and has the story of Superman's death written down already. He's already written it like a week or so prior. I think we get it mentioned in, I think, issue 2 or around an earlier issue.
10, because issue 10 ends with
issue
Lois
10,
kind of
correct.
like seeing the front page.
Yes, yeah.
That's like the cliffhanger of that.
Yeah, and Clark passes out at the Daily Planet, and that's where Lex shows up, and this is where the issue ends, and we go into the big finale, which I love issue 12. I think it's, again, all these issues are perfect, but issue 12 is so great because we get essentially a depowered Superman fighting Lex Luthor. It's incredible, and Lex Luthor is just on a high. He is on a trip, just overwhelmed by the power, and just rampaging throughout the streets, and he's experiencing being Superman he's experiencing being this person he's hated so much for the first time.
Love the kind of flip reversal of dynamics where Lex is essentially Superman and Superman is essentially Lex. And Superman doesn't have powers. He's just a mortal man. Lex is this sort of like godlike being who's like basically immortal. And despite the fact the roles reverse, Superman still comes out on top because it's not about powers. It's not about being able to fly or to shoot lasers or to hear things a million miles away. It's about heart, and it's about integrity, and it's about compassion and empathy.
And it's what Lex said earlier. It's more irony. It's what Lex said earlier on in the series, that brains always beats brawn. Yes. And Superman defeats Lex using his brain and coming up with different creative ways to get him, to defeat him. And ultimately, Lex is defeated by Superman just kind of stalling him and waiting for the potion to run out, which is so smart.
Knocks him out.
It's awesome. And we get that incredible speech at the end where it's just the bow on Lex's entire arc throughout this entire thing.
/ breakdown moment where he's kind of overwhelmed by the sensory, and he finally sees the world in the same way Superman does, and it humbles him, and it just kind of like melts his brain a little bit, where there's that great moment where he's like visibly tearing up, and he's like, this is all we have, this is it, we are all, he can feel like the force, essentially. He can feel how interconnected we all are, and he's like, this is all we have, and this is all we will ever be, and we have to look after each other and work together, and we have to be kind of one big organism as opposed to like looking after our own self-interests. And then turns around, Superman just knocks him out with a right hook.
It's incredible. And that's
what you get. One of the best lines in the entire book, which is Superman saying, "You could have saved the world years ago if it ever mattered to you."
Yeah,
which is like a perfect. It's those two panels side by side are like the perfect distillation of Clark and Lex's relationship.
It's incredible, and it's a perfect ending. And we get, like we hinted at earlier, the final mission of Superman is to literally reignite the sun. He flies up. The sun has become blue and is essentially snuffed out. And Superman, we see in the last 2 pages, we kind of slowly see him starting to like crack, and we see light kind of pouring out of the cracks in his skin. And he kisses Lois one last time and just shoots up into the sky and flies and reignites the sun, saving everybody. And that is his last mission as Superman, is to save the world. And it's the perfect like bow or cherry on top to this comic.
That ending reveal where Superman is like pulling machinery at the heart of the sun is great. And there's an aspect of it that I hadn't really thought about it, where it is almost like the image of Superman, like, he's pulling a big lever, feels so like workmanlike. Like it's
like
such
a Paul
return.
Bunyan.
It is, and it's like it feels almost like a return to like the 1930s Superman in a way, where it's like Superman was that kind of working class hero. He was the
champion of the oppressed.
Action Comics. Yeah, he's the t-shirt and jeans kind of guy. He is this very street level, grounded kind of working class champion of the oppressed character. And so the fact that his lasting legacy is almost like imagery you would associate with like a factory worker or someone doing like manual labor, where he's but on like Morrison says, it's everyday problems on a cosmic scale. He's building an artificial heart at the core of the sun. But I hadn't really read it in that way, but like there is something very like golden age, and no pun intended, classic about it.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of this is by coincidence that it's a
No,
golden age
it's not.
Superman
If
when he's literally golden.
in a Grant Morrison comic, there are no coincidences.
Well, it's
they
like how
thought
it's
about
until
it.
a recent read through. So obviously, there's a kind of epilogue to this story where we meet back up with Leo Quinton, and we reveal like his next project, and it's a door with the Superman symbol, but with the number 2.
Mm-hmm.
I never realized up until about a year ago that there's a payoff to that in this book. That if you go back to issue 6, one of the guys in the Superman squad has the number 2.
Yeah.
And that's it. Hence why I think that like you finish this book, you go back to number 6, because you get to see the golden like final form Superman essentially going on a mission with his son, effectively.
It's incredible. And
so yeah, there's so many layers to this. It's
something
so fun.
Something I also love about the ending of Superman, building the artificial sun, the golden version of Superman, is that it's both literal and figurative, because obviously he literally shows up in issue 6, but also you can read it as Lois kind of imagining Superman working, pulling levers and stuff to build an artificial sun, where we just saw him kind of fly into the sun and explode to reignite it. And I love that. I think you can kind of read it any way you want.
No, absolutely. It's like it works like obviously in a very literal perspective of this is what happens next, but also in a kind of more of like a meta way. It's just kind of like the myth of Superman lives on. That this isn't the end, this is just the beginning, that Superman's story will continue, and it's this cyclical thing, which just goes back to this idea of myth and of these characters as folklore, which Morrison's really into. That like the story just continues.
Yeah, it's a perfect comic. I mean, what else can we say? This is the definitive superhero story. This is Grant Morrison's magnum opus. I mentioned before, it's not my favorite Morrison. That always will be Animal Man, just from a personal standpoint.
That we can talk about this book for 2 hours with just nothing but praise and love, and then be like, it might not be Grant Morrison's best comic, but it's up there. Is such a testament to how amazing this writer is, and just the litany of incredible books that they've written.
It's phenomenal. And I mean, we've talked about this book to death already, but do you have any closing thoughts that you want to quickly mention before we wrap?
I won't say too much. I won't take up too much more of your time, because like we've gone super long here. I've enjoyed every minute of it. But yeah, this is my favorite comic book of all time. This is my favorite portrayal of Superman. This is the book that like made me fall in love with comics in the way I do, the way I read comics now, if that makes sense. It unlocked comics in a new way for me, and I think it was very important in like the trajectory, both as like a fan and as a reader, and also like from a professional standpoint. I don't think I'd do the job and the work I do now if it wasn't for this book. So I have a lot of love for it. I think it's amazing. Like we've talked about so many issues of this, and there's so many more bits of it that I could just rant on about. I'm now understanding why Eric did like a 14-hour podcast. Yeah,
you need so much time to go into detail with this comic.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect comic. It wouldn't be what I would give someone as their first Superman comic, but it's the definitive Superman story for me. I'm yet to read anything that comes close, and I've read a lot of amazing Superman stories by a lot of amazing writers that I love and cherish. But this is just like, we're blessed to have lived at the same time to have experienced this. This is a seminal piece of literature and of media, and of like, and it's just such a brilliant celebration of this enduring legacy of this character that means so much to so many people. Just being showcased at his very best.
Yeah, it truly is the definitive Superman story, definitive Superman comic, and I mean, I have nothing to add. It's it's incredible, and I could talk about it for 6 more hours, but we've been doing this for over 2 hours now. Before we completely wrap, I want to give you the floor to plug anything that you want to plug and let the listeners know where they can find you on social media.
Sure. Well, firstly, Johnny, thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute blast. I always love chatting comics with you, and getting to talk about one of my all-time favourite books makes it even sweeter. If you enjoyed listening to this, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, just at Owen Likes Comics. And then obviously on YouTube over at Owen Likes Comics. Depending on when this is going out, I will either be just about to put out or will have just put out a big, long video looking at Action Comics by Grant Morrison and Rags Morales, which is kind of like the 18-issue reimagining of Superman in the New 52, which is... I think if you like All-Star and you like some of the big ideas in this book, Action Comics is kind of like an interesting continuation. I think the two books very much do speak to each other and are in conversation with each other. And I've had so much fun researching and writing it and rereading this series and really unlocking it in a new way. I've grown to have such an appreciation of that Action Comics run that I always liked, but it was never like one of my top favorite Morrison books. Now I think it would be up there. That'll be going out at the time of recording. That'll be going out next Thursday. So it might be up or it might just be about to come out, but keep an eye out for that.
All right. So, yes, thank you so much for coming on the show again. It's always a blast chatting with you about comics. I love your YouTube channel. One of the best out there. And this should be up before that video. So fingers crossed this should be done and edited and up before that video comes out. But, if not, I will link that in the description below of this episode. But as always, all of my socials are down in the show notes below. Thank you all so much for listening, and until next time.